6-3, 6-3. That was the scoreline. Clean. Almost surgical. And if you only saw those numbers flash across your phone on Wednesday evening, you probably scrolled past without a second thought. Another first-round result at a WTA 1000. Another name you maybe half recognized. But here is what the scoreline does not tell you. It does not tell you about the woman on the other side of the net who once played a Grand Slam final on that exact same surface, who won Olympic gold, who has 12 WTA titles and nearly 2 decades of professional war behind her. And it does not tell you that the woman who just dismantled her, calmly and without a single wobble of panic, learned to play tennis on a country club court in the Philippines. A country that had never produced anything close to a world-class singles player before she came along. Alex Eala beat Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova 6-3, 6-3 in the first round of the 2026 WTA Madrid Open. And what made it historic was not the victory alone. It was how the victory arrived, what it confirmed, and what it buried. Let me set the scene properly, because the timeline matters here. 48 hours before she stepped onto the red clay of Estadio Aranza Sanchez, Eala was standing on a red carpet. The Laureus World Sports Awards were held in Madrid this year, and the organizers had invited her. 20 years old, 5'5", wearing a custom Filipina gown designed by her uncle and shipped across the world in less than a week. She stood in a room with Novak Djokovic, Simone Biles, Eileen Gu, Nadia Comaneci. Aryna Sabalenka collected the Sportswoman of the Year award. Eala was not there as a nominee. She was there as someone the sport had decided to watch. And then, 2 days later, she had to go prove the invitation was deserved. There is a specific kind of pressure that comes with being seen before you have one. Every athlete knows the difference between anonymity and spotlight, between the freedom of nobody expecting anything and the weight of people already composing your story. Eala had spent most of 2025 as an anonymous wildcard, a curiosity, a feel-good bracket filler. That version of her career is finished. She showed up in Madrid ranked 44th in the world, fresh off a career high of 29th just 5 weeks earlier, carrying a 15-10 record for the season, and she was no longer surprising anyone. She was expected to compete. The opponent across the net understood that transition better than almost anyone alive. Pavlyuchenkova turned professional in 2005. She was winning junior Grand Slams when Eala was learning to walk. By the time she reached the 2021 French Open final against Barbara Krejcikova, she had already been on tour for 16 years, had already been ranked as high as 11th in the world, had already accumulated the kind of scar tissue that makes a body of work in professional tennis. And then the knee went. She missed most of 2022. Came back in 2023, made the quarterfinals at Roland Garros, and then watched the rankings slide again. By the time she walked onto that Madrid court as a qualifier ranked 116th in the world, Pavlyuchenkova was 34 years old, 0-6 on the season, and carrying a body that had taken 2 medical timeouts during this very match. So let me be precise about what happened, because the easy version of this story is that Eala beat a diminished veteran and we should all calm down. The harder version, the true one, is that Eala beat a diminished veteran the way a top 30 player is supposed to beat a diminished veteran, and for a 20-year-old from a country with no professional tennis infrastructure, that composure is the breakthrough, not the scoreline. Watch the first 4 games. Pavlyuchenkova was not rolling over. She was dictating early rallies, pushing Eala behind the baseline, using the ball striking that once made her one of the most dangerous hitters in the women's game. Both players held through 2-2 without either looking comfortable. This was still contested. The clay was still unfamiliar territory for Eala. Her record coming in was exactly 2-2 on the surface this season, a win over Julia Grabher and Linz, followed by a loss to Ostapenko in the same tournament, followed by a thorough 1-6. 4-6 beating at the hands of Leylah Fernandez in Stuttgart barely a week ago. That Stuttgart loss is actually the key to understanding what happened in Madrid. Fernandez had been relentless in that match, breaking Eala twice to race out to a 5-0 first-set lead, dictating every rally with her lefty forehand, and Eala had never found a foothold. She won 42% of total points. She looked outclassed on the dirt. And the question hanging over her arrival in Madrid was stark. Is this player's clay court improvement real, or is it a mirage produced by favorable draws and inconsistent opponents? The Pavlyuchenkova match answered the question obliquely, which is the only way tennis ever answers anything. Eala broke in the fifth game of the first set. Not with a spectacular winner, not with some dramatic shift in tactics, but with the kind of baseline discipline that does not produce highlights, but does produce results. She extended rallies. She forced errors off Pavlyuchenkova's wing. She made the Russian play one more ball, then one more after that, until the geometry of the court started working against the older player's movement. The break opened a three-game surge to 4-2. A second break in the ninth game closed the set. The numbers told a story that the casual viewer might have missed entirely. Eala landed 68% of her first serves. She won 76% of first serve points. Against Pavlyuchenkova's 58% landing rate and 50% conversion, that gap in serving efficiency was the match. It was not close. It was not dramatic. And that was the point. Because here is what changed between Stuttgart and Madrid. In Stuttgart, Fernandez exploited Eala's second serve mercilessly, winning 61% of points on return against it. The second serve has been the structural flaw in Eala's game for her entire professional career. Every opponent who has scouted her knows it. Every coach who has studied her pattern circles it in red. When the first serve goes in at a high rate, Eala is a legitimate top 30 talent. When it does not, she becomes vulnerable to exactly the kind of aggressive returning that Fernandez deployed. So what did Eala and her coach Joan Bosch do in the week between Stuttgart and Madrid? They went to work on the first serve. Not a mechanical overhaul. Not some dramatic reimagining of her technique. They focused on percentage, on the discipline of getting the first ball in play at a rate that kept opponents from sitting on the second. And in the Pavlyuchenkova match, it worked. 68%. Not flashy. Not overpowering. Just relentlessly present. Enough to remove the single biggest lever her opponent could have pulled. Eala herself spoke about it after the match with the kind of clarity that suggested this was not accidental. She told Tennis Channel that first serve percentage was a deliberate focus going in. She knew Pavlyuchenkova was a big hitter. She knew that if the Russian got to tee off on second serves, the baseline discipline would not matter. So she took the variable away. This is what maturation looks like in professional tennis. It is not sudden and it is not cinematic. It is the gap between getting demolished in Stuttgart and adjusting the one specific tactical dial that the demolition exposed. Players who cannot make that adjustment in real time, between tournaments, on a surface they are still learning, do not survive on tour. Players who can make it are the ones who reach the second week of Grand Slams. Now pull the lens back further, because the Madrid match only makes sense inside the full arc of what Eala has done in the past 13 months. In March 2025, she arrived at the Miami Open as the world number 140, holding a wild card she had been given essentially as a gesture. She proceeded to beat Elena Ostapenko, a former French Open champion, in straight sets. Then she beat Madison Keys, the reigning Australian Open champion and world number 5, 6-4, 6-2, becoming the first Filipina ever to defeat a top 10 opponent. Then she beat Iga Swiatek, the 5-time Grand Slam champion and world number 2, 6-2, 7-5, in what was voted the biggest upset of the entire 2025 WTA season. She reached the semifinals. She went from anonymous to inescapable in 10 days. What happened after Miami is the part people talk about less, and it is the part that matters more. The rankings surged. The expectations arrived. The scouting reports got detailed. Suddenly every opponent on tour had film on her patterns, her tendencies, her serve, her movement on different surfaces. The anonymity that had fueled Miami was gone, and in its place was the grinding, unremarkable reality of being a known quantity who still had technical holes in her game. Her 2025 season ended at world number 53. Not a collapse, but not the continued vertical ascent that the Miami narrative had promised. She won a challenger title in Guadalajara. She claimed SEA Games gold for the Philippines. She recorded the first main draw Grand Slam victory in Filipino tennis history at the US Open, beating Clara Tauson. These are significant results, but they live in the space between the spectacular and the sustainable, and the question coming into 2026 was always going to be which direction that space resolved. The answer, so far, has been complicated and honest. Eala started 2026 with a first-round loss at the Australian Open, going down to Alicia Parks after winning the first set 6-0. She reached the quarterfinals in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. She beat Jasmine Paolini, the world number 8, in Dubai, confirming that her ability to take down elite players on hard courts was not a Miami fluke. She reached the fourth round at Indian Wells after Coco Gauff retired injured in their third-round match. She was seeded at both Indian Wells and Miami. She was, in the language of the tour, established. And then Miami 2026 arrived, and the tour reminded her that establishment comes with its own cost. Karolina Muchova destroyed her 6-0, 6-2 in the round of 16. Not a competitive loss. A rout. The kind of scoreline that makes you question whether the previous months were real. Eala dropped from her career high of 29th back down to 44th. The clay season loomed. And clay, historically, has been the surface where her game makes the least sense. The logic is straightforward. Eala's greatest weapon is her return game. Her ability to read serve direction, to time the ball off the bounce, to redirect pace into angles that wrong-foot servers is genuinely elite. It is the skill that beat Swiatek, that beat Keys, that made Miami possible. But on clay, the serve itself is decelerated by the surface. Returns become less decisive. Points become longer. Construction becomes more important than redirection. And the serve, her weakest shot, is exposed more ruthlessly on clay because opponents have more time to set up aggressive returns of their own. That is the puzzle Eala and Bosch have been solving all spring. Linz was the first clay test. She beat Grabher comfortably, then lost to Ostapenko 6-4, 7-5 in a match where she competed but could not sustain the pressure for 2 full sets. Stuttgart was worse, the Fernandez demolition suggesting the surface might be a ceiling she could not break through. And then Madrid happened, and the narrative shifted again. What I want to emphasize about the Pavlyuchenkova win is not its magnitude but its texture. This was not an upset. This was not a miracle. This was a professional tennis player solving a professional tennis problem with professional tennis tools. Eala read the match correctly. She identified that Pavlyuchenkova's physical condition was deteriorating after the first medical timeout and pushed the pace accordingly. She broke 2-love for 4-2 in the second set immediately after the off-court medical break, recognizing that the Russians' rhythm had been disrupted and attacking before it could be reestablished. She saved 5 of 6 break points across the match, which means that in the moments where Pavlyuchenkova did threaten, Eala's serving held. She closed it out in 91 minutes. On clay. At altitude. In a WTA 1000. After losing her previous match on the surface 1-6, 4-6. That is not a story about talent. Talent was established a long time ago. That is a story about adaptation, and adaptation is the thing that separates careers from moments. Now the draw gets real. Elise Mertens awaits in the second round. The Belgian is seeded 19th, is the number 1 doubles player in the world, and she beat Eala the only time they have played, back in 2023 when Eala was still ranked outside the top 200. That result is functionally meaningless given how much Eala has changed since then, but Mertens presents a different kind of problem than Pavlyuchenkova did. She will not overpower Eala. She will not hit through her. She will extend rallies, vary pace, move the ball around the court with the patience of someone who has been playing at this level for nearly a decade. Eala will have to manufacture offense rather than redirect it, and on clay, where her offensive tools are still developing, that is a genuine test. Beyond Mertens, the projected path runs through Maria Sakkari, then potentially Kristina Buxa or Magdalena Freck, and the bracket does not get easier from there. A deep run here would push Eala back toward the top 40, potentially even the top 35, with Roland Garros seeding implications hanging in the balance. A second-round exit would confirm the pattern of inconsistency that has defined her clay court results. But here is what I think the Pavlyuchenkova match actually proved, beyond rankings and projections and draw paths. It proved that Eala has internalized the difference between performing and competing. Performing is what happened in Miami 2025. It was electric, it was unforgettable, it was the kind of run that makes a career. But performing requires the adrenaline of the impossible, the freedom of having nothing to lose, the energy of a crowd discovering someone new. Competing is what happened on Estadio Aranza Sanchez on Wednesday night. It was methodical, it was controlled, it was the kind of win that does not trend on social media but does accumulate into a body of work. She said something on court after the match, switching from English to Spanish mid-sentence, that captured it perfectly. She said she feels comfortable in Madrid, that she feels at home. She has lived in Spain since she was 13. She graduated from the Rafa Nadal Academy. She has trained on these courts, eaten in these restaurants, learned the language, absorbed the rhythms of a country that is not hers by birth, but has become hers by choice and by labor. When she said she felt at home, she was not performing for the crowd. She was stating a fact. And that fact, the fact of belonging, is the thing that separates this Madrid from last year's Madrid, where she lost to Swiatek in a heartbreaking three-setter after being a set and a breakup. Last year, she was still arriving. This year, she has arrived. The question is no longer whether she can compete at this level. She can. The question is whether her game, specifically on clay, can sustain the kind of grinding, attritional, point-by-point warfare that the surface demands over 5 or 6 rounds against players who have spent their entire careers learning its particular cruelties. The Mertens match will tell us something. Not everything. Tennis never tells you everything in one match, but something. And whatever happens on Friday, the girl who left Manila at 13, who cried herself to sleep in a dormitory in Mallorca, who won junior Grand Slams while the professional circuit ignored her, who turned a wild card into a semi-final and a semi-final into a career, will walk back onto that clay with the same 68% first serve discipline she brought against Pavlyuchenkova. Because that is what she has now that she did not have in Miami. Not talent. She always had that. Not belief. She always had that too. She has method. She has a plan for the shot she cannot hit, a system for the surface she has not mastered, a process for turning deficiency into management and management into competition. That is what history looks like when it is actually being made. Not in the moment of the upset. Not in the gasp of the crowd. But in the quiet Wednesday night win, 6-3, 6-3, against a qualifier who used to be great, on a court named after a Spanish champion, in a city that has become home, by a player who is no longer becoming anything. She is already here.